Friends, welcome to the webinar, to Be WasteWise webinar in partnership with WasteAid UK. This is our third webinar together, and we're doing this to make sure WasteAid UK's publication, a toolkit for waste management, is easily accessible to a global audience. And Be WasteWise has organized about 35 events this year. Considered that in our first year in 2013, we organized just 8 events. It's a huge scale up, and we're trying to scale it up further for next year. And we're planning to have about 50 events next year, which is almost one event every week, which will make us one of the largest platforms for video knowledge in waste management and circular economy sectors. We've helped organizations like WasteAid UK, the International Solid Waste Association, Asian Development Bank, and MWH Global get their knowledge out to a global audience. And later this month, we'll also be helping World Bank launch their report Water Waste 2.0. That's their second version. So we have 2 other events coming up this month, one with the International Solid Waste Association, where they'll be talking about waste collection systems and the status of them worldwide. And we'll also launch the World Bank report, as I mentioned earlier. With that, let me also tell you that Be WasteWise is looking for regional partners, other organizations who have access to expertise or who have expertise and would like to reach a global audience. And we're also looking for great speakers and moderators who would like to shine with Be WasteWise in the coming year. So if you or your organization is one of them, please write to us at connect@wastewise.be. With that, I'm really happy to have Zoë and Mike on Be WasteWise again. So Zoë, take it from here.
Thanks very much, Ranjit. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us again. This is our third webinar in the series that we've put together with Be WasteWise. So yeah, thanks very much to Ranjit and Swetha as well for all their help getting everything together so that we can present to you live today. So I'm just going to switch to my my screen and start the presentation. Here we go. So today we're going to be talking about setting up and growing your organic waste management initiative. Here we are. This is me, Zoë Lenkiewicz, and Mike Webster. Do you want to say hello, Mike?
Hey, everyone.
So yeah, Mike's the Chief Executive of WasteAid, and I'm Head of Programs and Engagement. So we're going to be taking you through today some of the more important points we thought to share with you about how to set up an organic waste management program in your community. So a brief introduction to WasteAid. Our mission is to transform lives by sharing recycling skills with the world's poorest communities. We work with partners and influence decision makers to maximise our impact. This photo was taken in the Gambia at the first ever waste composition analysis that was undertaken in the country. So this is where we normally, the starting point for most of our projects is to find out what's in the waste in a local area, what waste materials a community is producing, so that we can then identify where the problem materials are and decide how best to manage them, usually through recycling. Now, what we've found is that all over the world, the most sort of common materials that are in the waste stream that are unmanaged, i.e. people don't really, they're not recovering the value from that material that they could be, is flexible plastics and organic material. So today we're going to be focusing on organic material, and the next webinar will focus on those flexible plastics. So today, here's the introduction. I'm going to be sort of giving you a brief rundown of what we'll be talking about. Then Mike's going to talk about the basics of organic waste. What is it? Why does it matter? We'll then cover the different products that you can make from organic waste, including animal feed, soil improver, and cooking fuel. And then finally, we'll talk about some of the elements to setting up a business so that you can make some profit and grow your program. Most of the knowledge that we are sharing today is included in the WasteAid toolkit. Very happy to say this is won third place in the International Solid Waste Association Publication Awards. So it's now an award-winning toolkit, which we're very proud of. So please do have a look on the website, where you'll find plenty more information about what to do with organic waste in your community. So here we are. This is the third in the webinar series. The first one was an introduction to community waste management. The second one was how to grow your waste and recycling business. Now we're on organic wastes, and the final one at the end of November will focus on what to do with those pesky plastic wastes in your community. So finally then, for the introduction, our message: if you are living in a place without a decent waste management service, you can change things. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Mike, who is going to pick up from organic waste, the basics. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Zoe. So what we're going to be looking at is organic waste. What is organic waste? Well, put simply, it's material that was once living. It comes from either a plant or an animal and is biodegradable. That means it will rot. Okay, so that is the opportunity of organic waste, but that is also the challenge. Why should we care about organic waste? Well, first of all, there's a lot of it. When we are doing our waste analysis, as we do in many lower income countries, we find that it's up to 60 or to 70% of the waste stream by mass. That means that we simply can't ignore it. We're serious about understanding and dealing with the waste in an area. We've got to make sure that we're doing something useful with the organic waste. And this slide just shows why it's so important. There are two aspects to the uncontrolled dumping of organic waste that's problematic. First of all, it produces methane. When organic waste decomposes without oxygen, as it will do in a hole in the ground, as it will do when it's just openly dumped, it will produce methane. Now, methane, which is the major part of biogas, the gas that comes off rotting organic waste, first of all, is an extremely powerful greenhouse gas. It's 21 times the power of carbon in terms of climate change impact. So that really matters from a climate change point of view. It's not just the gas that comes off. There's leachate that comes off as well. And if you think about organic waste, what's the major constituent of it? Well, that's water. And when organic waste breaks down, whether it's food waste, whether it's agricultural waste, it gives up a lot of water, a lot of liquid, and that can pollute local watercourses and cause a real problem. And finally, there's one more impact of methane, and that, I'm just going to open this slide here. This is a picture of a news article from Mexico back in 2010, showing that the escape of methane or biogas can cause serious problems in terms of explosions on informal dump sites. So biogas can be explosive. Now, that flammability is also an opportunity, as we'll later see. So we'll be running through these in slightly more detail shortly, but there are several products that can be made from organic waste. And understanding what's in your organic waste and acting appropriately is important. The image on the left is one of fish waste being turned into smoked and dried and being turned into animal feed. This is then milled, and it can be then used as a supplement for chicken or cow feed. It can also, organic waste can also be turned into a compost soil improver. There's vermiculture and there's normal composting. We'll be looking at those. And finally, cooking fuels. Have a look at a couple of opportunities. Biogas, which is similar to the methane emissions that we were just looking at, and production of charcoal briquettes. So we've thought about who WasteAid is. We've just thought about the basics of organic waste and why it matters. Simply, organic waste, it decomposes and creates biogas. It breaks down and causes leachate. And why it matters, well, there's a lot of it. The next step is now to be looking at those products in detail that we can actually make out of it. Now, because of our time constrictions today, we're not going to look at all of them in detail, and we urge you to follow this up with, if you're interested in a greater detailed look at our toolkit, which has got a lot more information on this. We'll be looking at the opportunities to make into animal feed, soil improver, and cooking fuel. So I'm just going to move quickly on to the opportunities to make into animal feed. So essentially, in many ways, that smoking is a well and understood way of dealing with fish for human consumption. Those elements that aren't fed to humans can be fed to animals. So the heads, the bones, the tails can be smoked, dried and milled using a simple smoking technique. Again, the information, the technical specifications are all given in our toolkit. Okay, and why is this of interest? Well, it's a good way of maximizing and making value from a particular waste stream. Again, we can always compost things, but this is a simple way of adding value. And it increases productivity, particularly if it's used for addition for chicken feed. It's good for young animals and can be used for chickens, pigs, goats, cows, farmed fish. In many drier areas of Sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, in places like Mauritania, when there's a lack of fodder, a lack of feed at the end of the dry season, fish supplements are commonly used as an addition to the fodder available, and it's an alternative to grass in the dry season. So that's just one use of organic waste, specifically this protein-rich fish waste. I'm just going to hand over to Zoe now, who's going to talk about composting.
Thanks, Mike. Oh, I can hear myself. Something weird's going on. I'll just keep going. Okay, thank you. So yes, right. So animal feed is probably one of the more valuable ways that you can reuse your organic waste. If you don't have animals to feed, or or you've got plenty of animal food, an alternative that you can use your organic waste for is as a soil improver, or what we call compost. Now, it's very important that we understand the nutrient cycle and the carbon cycle. So basically, when you're growing vegetables in the ground, they're absorbing nutrients from the ground, and if we don't replace those nutrients, then the ground becomes depleted, and you won't be able to keep producing as great a yield of your crops every year on year, because you're going to start losing the quality in your soil. So what you can do is you can use organic waste like food waste and woody waste, compost it down using a process that we're about to explain, and then use that. It looks like the final product looks and feels like a soil, and you can spread that on your land, and that will help replenish the nutrient value of your soil. So let's have a look. How does composting work? You'll need a mix of carbon-rich material and nitrogen-rich material. Now, carbon-rich stuff is things like leaves, straw, or woody materials, twigs, sugar cane, anything like that. Nitrogen-rich material is kind of more your sloppy, wet material, like grass, like food scraps, and animal manure. So you want to have a mix of these, because if you have too much nitrogen, it's going to be too wet. And if you have too much carbon, it's not going to be wet enough. So yeah, you'll need to experiment a little bit to get your mix right. Then when you mix them together, what you'll also have in your compost heap are macroorganisms, which are they're little animals like earthworms and insects that will come and eat their way through the food waste and so on, and turn it into a nice mulchy material. And then also the microorganisms. So these are the tiny animals that you can't see with the naked eye. So your bacteria, your fungi, and your microbes, and they then break down the material even further so that it's a nice fine soil-like structure. You also need water, because if it's too dry, as I was saying earlier, it just won't rot. So if you're living somewhere that's very hot and dry, it's probably worth sprinkling your compost heap with water to keep it nice and damp. You don't want it too wet, but equally you don't want it so dry that it's going to blow away in the wind. You also need to make sure that it's well aerated, because if there isn't enough air, then your compost heap will actually start to produce methane gas, which, as Mike explained earlier, is very strong in terms of climate change, and it's also explosive. So, and it also smells bad. So you want to make sure that it's nicely aerated, nice and moist, and a good mix of carbon and nitrogen rich materials. Then when everything's working well and you've got a nice mix going, it will give off a little bit of heat and carbon dioxide, and the whole process will produce the final product, which is compost. You can then spread that onto your garden or your agricultural land, and you will get better yield of your crops from it. So as well as improved yield, it improves your soil structure. So, you know, your land won't turn into a dust bowl or something like that. It will really help it stay strong and keep a nice fibrous structure, so that all of the little, you know, the small animals and things that live in the soil, they can all get along quite happily and keep your soil nice and healthy. And it also improves water management. So when the rains come, you know, it won't you know, if your land is too dry and dusty, the water kind of just runs off the top of it, doesn't it? Whereas if it's nice and you know, if it's got a good amount of mulch in it from this compost, then it's going to retain that water for longer and then release it slowly to the plants and to your crops. Compost also helps reduce pests and diseases, and it costs less than chemical fertilizer. So lots of good reasons to be recycling your food and woody waste into compost. A couple of precautions that it's worth taking. Compost is generally safe, but we would still recommend that you wear some gloves, wash your hands when you've finished working with it, and if it's very dry material, do wear a face mask, because the very small particles that are contained in dry organic waste can eventually harm your lungs if you breathe too much of it. So just worthwhile taking some of these small precautions, but generally there's nothing to worry about when you're composting. So there's a couple of, well, there's quite a lot of different ways that you can set up your compost heap, but we're going to just talk about two of the more common types. The first one is called a triple pit compost. So here you dig 3 holes in the ground, and you put the mixture of nitrogen rich and carbon rich material into the first pit, and you leave it here for a week. And then after a week, you dig it out of that hole and you move it across into the second hole. You leave that for a week, and then finally you remove it from the second hole and move it across into the first hole. Sorry, move it across into the third hole. And that way you can, as you move waste from the first pit to the second pit, you can then put a new load of waste into the first pit, and as you move them across to weeks 2 and 3, then again you can move more waste into your first pit. So all in all, you can have 3 pits worth of material composting at any one time. The reason for moving it from one pit to the next is to give it a good aeration. So you're mixing, as you move it, you're mixing the material quite naturally. You're letting plenty of air get into it. And those, don't forget, those small animals, they need the air to be able to survive. And you know, once they're there, then they're going to help eat the material and turn it into a nice mulchy material. So yeah, you want to aerate it as you move it from one pit to the other. After 3 weeks, you can take the material out of the third pit, just put it to one side, leave it maybe for another week until it's really looking nice and dark and has a soil-like structure, and then it's ready to be used straight on your agricultural land or your kitchen garden. The second technique is a layered cell compost. So in this example, we built what we call a cell. It's kind of just a it's a holding container that we built from bricks. This one we put on legs, actually, just put it on some little stilts. So it's about waist height, I would say. That helps keep vermin out. And also because then the bottom of the cell, we put a wire mesh, and that enables any any small bits to drop through, but it also enables air to come into the process, which keeps it nice and aerated, as I was explaining, to keep those microbes alive and doing the business. So at the bottom we put a layer of branches and twigs. Then on top of that layer, moving into the middle picture, we've got our mix again of nitrogen rich and carbon rich material, nicely mixed together, so you've got a good healthy mixture of nitrogen and carbon there. And then finally, if you've got if your nitrogen rich material is particularly smelly, for example if it's fish waste, which does tend to have quite a strong odor, then you can add a layer of finished compost over the top just to control that smell. Your neighbors will be grateful. Okay, so that's composting. I'm going to pass you back to Mike now, who's going to talk to you about another way of using organic waste, which is to convert it into biogas. So Mike, over to you.
Mike, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, thanks, Ranjit. Thanks, Zoe. We talked about the challenge of managing organic waste earlier, and that one of the arguably undesirable byproducts was methane. Undesirable because it is a powerful climate change gas, and also potentially in certain circumstances a hazard. Using certain techniques, we can turn that problem into an opportunity, as we like to do at WasteAid. And if we look at the cow is the original biogas producer. Food goes in one end, in the mouth. It goes through various stomachs and is broken down, producing two products: fertilizer or cow dung, and also biogas. And this is, if we can capture that, we can use this. So how do we capture this? So let's have a look at a simple biodigester. If we pour the dung in on the left here is just simple diagram of a spout, material, organic material, food waste, dung, goes into a digester, into a container. I'll show you a picture and some photos of one in a second to give you a clearer idea. A gas holding dome that's ideally flexible. It's simple, and collects the biogas that comes off this digester, and the outlet then takes the biogas off for cooking, or you can attach it to a gas engine and run electricity off it. Okay, now there are a variety of designs. Again, the specifications are in our toolkit. Please take a look. They can be made from a variety of building materials. This is from cement and blocks, but also from plastic containers, if that is what you have to hand. So here we have a couple of images of the diagram previously. You can just see using simple cement and blocks and a concrete dome with the spout, the hole at the top on the right, where a hose pipe can be connected, and that can be taken off for gas. Anaerobic digestion, which is the official name for this, I guess the technical name for this, really does, it is an important and really potentially very useful technology, a way of dealing with organic waste. You can get the fiber and the liquor off it, the liquid and the solid portion, and that can be used in much the same way soil compost can be, as a soil conditioner. And the gas obviously can be used for cooking or electricity generation. However, it does require a little bit more investment than composting, which at its most simplest is simply putting waste in a hole in the ground. And we also advise access to technical support, because essentially what you're doing is designing a cow's stomach, and that cow's stomach has to be fed properly. And over the year, over different times of years, for instance, the different type of organic waste going in can vary considerably. So the benefits of producing using biogas, it can turn waste into energy and fertilizer. And this biogas can be a replacement for fossil fuel. So there's a double-edged climate benefit there. You're avoiding the production of methane, and also you're avoiding the burning of fossil methane, fossil gas. The organic fertilizer can replace chemical fertilizers, and it reduces carbon footprint by avoiding methane release. And obviously the material that comes out of it, the biogas, is free. But it's important to think about how will you use this biogas. Do you have a need for constant gas? Is there a way of containing it? There are inflatable containers that can be used, so it's worth thinking about. I'm now going to hand over to Zoe, who is going to talk to you about another way of dealing with waste, charcoaling.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I would just like to remind the audience before I continue that you're welcome to ask questions using the live chat box below the video stream. I'd like to say thanks to Derek for his comment that he's added, saying, so Derek has said that 3 weeks seems like a little bit of a short time to turn the material into usable compost using the triple pit composting method. So I would say, yeah, you're probably right there, Derek. I think it depends probably, it depends a lot on the materials that you're using and the temperature, you know, your sort of ambient temperature of where you live. So you might need to let the material compost for a bit longer, and that's going to be down to your discretion, really. So have a look at it, see how it's getting on. It's a bit of trial and error, and with time you'll get good at the process, and you'll know for what mix of material how long it's going to take in your climate. So I'm going to go back to the presentation now. Share here, click there, and right, here we go. So on to charcoaling. Charcoaling, transforming woody waste into fuel briquettes. Now, where we talked before about the mixture of materials, some are carbon rich, some are nitrogen rich. So if you want to make compost, you need a mix of the two, of the carbon and the nitrogen. If you're making biogas, you want mostly nitrogen rich materials. And then if you want to make charcoal, this time you'd focus more on the carbon-rich materials. So places where, for example, you have a lot of agricultural waste, for example, coconut shells or mango leaf or peanut shells or anything that's particularly woody, that stuff is ideal for making charcoal briquettes. So let's have a bit of a closer look at the benefits and the process. Briquettes, they can be sold for cheaper than traditional charcoal. So in areas around the world where people are cooking already on firewood or charcoal, these charcoal briquettes are a much better alternative because they're cheaper, they're low smoke. So if you're using them in the household, you're not going to be creating a very smoky atmosphere that can be bad for people's eyes and their lungs and so on, can be an irritant. They burn hotter and longer than traditional charcoal. They don't require the cutting of trees, which is very important. Obviously, you know, deforestation is a huge and growing problem all around the world. So by using woody waste, stuff that's just, you know, apparently has no value, it's been discarded by people because they have no use for it. If you can turn that into a nice sustainable cooking fuel, then you're onto a winner. And finally, the equipment is cheap and the process is easy. So, you know, what's not to love? Right then, how do we make these charcoal briquettes? First of all, you need to gather your carbon-rich materials. So as I said, for example, coconut shell, peanut shell, mango leaf, banana leaf, twigs from the forest, anything that's like fallen onto the ground in the forest, seed pods, this sort of thing. And waste from agricultural or even you know, cooking processes, as long as it's dry woody waste. You don't really want the wet sloppy food waste in this process. Now what we're going to do, we're going to get an oil drum and cut some holes in the bottom of it, pop it on top of a few stones so the air can get into the bottom. Okay, then we're going to light a little fire underneath it, put the material inside the oil drum and light it. Put a lid on, and what's going to happen is it's going to burn very slowly. You might want to stir it a few times to make sure that the material is burning evenly, but then you don't want to burn it completely to ash. That's not the idea. The idea is just to turn it into char, so that black material that looks like charcoal. But obviously, because you're using scrappy bits of waste, it's going to make this charcoal, but in very small pieces. So then the process is, how do we turn it from these very small pieces into a briquette? So what you do, once you've looked inside your oil drum and you see that the material is nice and black now, you tip it out, sprinkle some water on top to put out any flames and stop it burning. Okay, you want to stop the combustion process right there. Don't get it so wet that it needs time to dry out, just enough to stop it burning. Okay, let it cool down, and then you're going to grind it into a powder. And you can do that with a pestle and mortar, or you could pop it into a sack and beat it with a stick or a stone, or depending on the material, you can simply crush it with your hands. So once you've got it into a powder-like substance, then you need to mix it with a binder. Now, for a binder, we tend to use some kind of flour mixed with water. So depending on where you live and what's available to you, you could use cassava flour, you could use rice flour, anything really, just mixed with water so that it's like a starchy gum. That's what you want. And then so you're going to mix that starchy gum into the black powder, mix it all up so that it's going to hold together in kind of a moist, a moist material. And you're going to push that material into a briquette press, and I'm going to show you one of those in a moment. And there's different ways to make a briquette press, but ultimately you just want to be squeezing the water out of that material, compacting it nice and tight so that it'll hold together by itself in a briquette shape. And then you just leave it to dry in the sun for 2 to 7 days, depending on the material and how hot it is where you live. So the women in this picture, they've put the black material inside the briquette press. They've put a plunger on top, and the lady at the background there, she's hammering the press down to make the material nice and compacted inside the press. So the materials that are ideal for charcoal briquettes, anything that's dry and woody. So you can see in the left-hand picture, we've got your nut shells, you've got leaves, sugarcane, coconut shell, this sort of thing. On the right, there's a photo from one of our recent programs. You can see there, there's the 3 white sacks have got material in that hasn't been carbonized yet, and the red sack there, that's got peanut shell that's been through this process. So that's about to be mixed with the binder and used to make the briquettes. Here's 2 of our colleagues at Women's Initiative The Gambia. They're crushing the carbonized material in this big pestle and mortar. You can see the oil drum on the left there by the woman in orange, and here in the foreground are some briquettes that have been dried in the sun. And finally, here's a briquette press. Now, this is the one that we use in our training. You put the small plunger inside the bottom of the cup with the stick sticking out the bottom, pop that into the wooden block so that it doesn't shake. Then you take your mix of material, squash it into the cup shape, put the tall plunger down in top, and hammer it down, and then you can just pop the whole lot out, and the briquette will pop out all nice and solid and ready to just be put in the sun to dry. All of the detail for this process is in the WasteAid toolkit, wasteaid.org.uk/toolkit. So do have a look. And so that's the charcoal briquette process. I'm going to pass you back to Mike now, who's going to talk a little bit about actually turning these processes into a business. So over to you, Mike.
Please unmute yourself.
Sorry, we've just got a couple of questions, and I'll just rattle through those before we continue on with the presentation. Sadie asks whether the size of the pits matter for the 3-week pit method. Can I just add to the 3 weeks, we found works in a very hot, wet, tropical environment. If you are in a temperate environment, you'd be looking at longer. The size of the pits, I would suggest around a cubic meter and more, because then you can start getting a bulk, a mass that can warm up enough to actually get the system going. Sadie also asks whether cardboard could be used for the briquettes. Yes, there's an opportunity there to either shred and try it without carbonizing. Our partners in the Gambia actually have developed a system of just briquetting sawdust held together with binder, and that burns very well. You could have a similar approach for shredded cardboard, or try carbonizing it. Again, it's lignin, it's got these long carbon chains in it, so and it's woody material. So the principle with it is have a go. What is local? Derek, you said, do you need to shred the input materials prior to converting it to char? Again, if it is not necessarily, I mean, if you actually think about charcoaling, it's originally used with large lumps of wood. Essentially, the larger the lumps, the longer you need to charcoal, because you're trying to get that torrefaction process, that's the official name for charcoaling, all the way through a larger piece of material, if you like. So you don't necessarily have to shred the materials prior to converting it to char. There's a question from Boverlane. I would like to know how to establish a survey questionnaire to encourage households to sort their waste at the base for the production of biogas and or compost. Certainly that's a conversation we can continue after this. I'm just going to share my screen again, and we can just continue on with the presentation. Right, so we've looked at why organic waste matters, and a few ideas for what can be done with it. Again, there's lots more information in the toolkit. We have just a few minutes here to talk about it today, but I think our main thing is to say, look, it's not just about composting. There's plenty of other things you can do as well. So how do you maximize the value of your organic waste? Well, this image may be familiar from those of you that followed us in our last webinar, and let's just break this down in terms of organic waste. Well, materials of supply, you need to know what is in your waste stream, and how much organic waste there is, what is in that, because all of a sudden that material, that organic waste, it is not waste, it is resource. It's the feedstock for your business. If you've invested time and money on developing equipment, developing a site to deal with this material, you need to know it's going to be there. Okay, it's your feedstock. And with organic waste, that's particularly important. Organic waste is very seasonal. If you're living in a place with a very, very defined rainy and dry season, think about it, there'll be a large amount of growth of plant material during the rainy season. So think about the different materials there. You'll also probably have more agricultural waste during harvest time. During the dry season, there'll be arguably less organic waste and possibly more desiccated. So think about the different sorts of materials that are available, how you can get hold of them, the quality in which you can get hold of them. What do I mean about quality? Well, I mean separated from potentially contaminating materials. So, for instance, if you're looking to have food waste separated, so you can turn it into, for instance, animal feed, yes, that's one thing. But if you're going to have to segregate that from potentially hazardous or dangerous other wastes, you know, is there going to be a problem there? How can you separate and collect those materials in as high a quality way as possible? Demand. Who wants what where you are? Is there a large agricultural community who'd be interested in new sources of soil conditioner and nutrients for their farms? Are you living in an urban area where there's less of that? Are people interested in cooking fuels? Do people use gas? Do people use charcoal typically as a cooking fuel? Think about the product. Don't just people have always just moved to charcoal historically, but there's lots more you can do with materials. Get help and support. we are working in the world of waste, but the thing about the world of waste is that it touches on many other areas. So for instance, are there agricultural extension officers who are based where you are who could give you more technical support on composting? For instance, are there people who might be able to advise you on the sorts of demand for different materials? What other support is there out there? And finally, develop that business plan. Understand where you can get your materials, what the demand is for, and start thinking about what the potential, how much you can sell things for. Okay, so because cost recovery, making sure you can make money and profit from that, from your project, from your scheme, is absolutely vital. So you can keep that money going around, so you can pay for more materials to be collected, so you can pay the rent for your land, so you can pay your workers, so you can pay yourself. And we've looked at a few of the options for different sorts of materials, but organic waste is not all the same. And we've got a big image of a large amount of groundnut waste on the left, but there's lots of other sorts of waste. There's fish waste, there's food waste, there's different types of agricultural waste. In different parts of the world, there are different sorts of organic waste. So really break down the waste and understand what that is composed of, because as soon as you start understanding what it's composed of, the answers will start dropping out. What can I make it into? What are the opportunities? And we've already talked about seasonality at the end. Different things grow at different times of year. Okay, so ensure that you're not all of a sudden set to do something with, for instance, at one type of food waste, when that food waste is only around for perhaps 2 or 3 months of the year. Is there demand for your product? Okay, who will buy your product? Is it farmers? Is it gardeners? Is it people looking for fuel alternatives? Do people understand your product, and do they trust it? Sometimes people think, why would I want to put something that is made from rubbish, made from waste on my land? Why would I want to cook my dinner with something made from garbage? You have to convince people that your product is not only as good as the existing product, it's better, and that you can do it for a cheaper price. Okay, so think about, when you're writing your business plan, will you have time to, first of all, develop and perfect your product? We can't stress that enough. When you're learning how to make charcoal, when you're learning how to compost, it will take you, probably several months to really perfect your product. Okay, and make sure that you're able to do that, that you have perhaps another source of income, that you've got another job while you're doing this. Okay, then have free samples. They don't know your product and they won't trust it in the early days, so give away a free sample. Okay, so gaining people's trust, then they'll understand that your product is as good, if not better. Okay, so really think about it. Don't think about it in terms of waste. Think about it in terms of out-competing the existing products on the market. You're wanting to make something that's better and cheaper. So those are the key principles. Again, this is expanded upon in our toolkit, so please take a look at that. And we've now reached the end of, well, we're reaching towards the end of this session. So I'm just going to hand over to Zoe, who is going to wrap up.
Thanks, Mike. So I just want to say we've got like 2 minutes left. So if you've got any more questions, please do send them quickly now. I wanted to say we've had a comment from Enzo from the Zero Waste International Alliance saying that they've prepared a paper about key decision factors between composting and making biogas, and they're happy to share that if anyone's interested. So maybe, thanks Enzo, maybe we could share a link to it on the WasteAid website, would be great. Also, Beauvalin, with regard to your question about establishing a survey, I think this is an important question, and I just want to respond to it quickly, because if you want to set up a business collecting people's food waste and turning it into compost and selling them that compost back, then you do need to do some market research first. You're absolutely right. So the things I just jotted down very quickly, what I would do, I would ask them, what organic waste do you produce? Is it vegetable peelings, rotten food, leftover cooked food, animal bones, etc.? How much are you producing, either in grams or cups or bags? What do you do with it at the moment? Does it smell? Do the flies cause a nuisance? Would you be interested in having your organic waste collected? And then I would also ask people if they grow their vegetables at home and if they would be interested in buying some kind of soil conditioner that would help increase that yield. So I can jot all that down in an email to you after the webinar. My email's zoe@wasteaid.org.uk. So I'm going to pop back finally to the last few slides. Here we go. And right then, okay, go from current slide. Here we are. So this is the end of this webinar. I'm just wrapping it up now. The next one is on the 28th of November, managing plastics in your community and the environment. So we expect that one to be a very popular webinar. So please do register early for that one. Here we are. This is the toolkit. Please do have a look at this for much more detailed information and illustrated step-by-step guides. And that's it. I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate all of your input and questions. And yeah, please do keep in touch. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Okay, thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.